Alright, in this video I will be replacing an exterior door. This turns out to be quite a bit more work than I had initially bargained for. I'll show you sort of what the issues with this thing are. Obviously it's pretty old, but you can see there's a lot of, I wouldn't say dry rot, it's more like wet rot at the bottom of this thing around the brick mold and in the frame of the door. And you can see I could sort of just punch it apart and it sort of breaks away, which is only part of the problem. Also see up at the top, it's completely rotted away. I don't know if that was a bird that was pecking at that. I've never used this door, and I don't think the stairs are to code. So quite a bit of work needs to be done on it. You can see there's quite a patina on the door handle. The exterior looks absolutely black. Interior looks gold. The other problem, I put that spray foam in while I was doing the walls just so there wasn't any moisture seeping down, but you can see that it's obviously rotten away, and that is the left hand corner of the door, and the right hand corner of the door looks exactly the same. So I'm going to pop the door off and see just how bad the floor is. It turns out pretty bad. I'm using a utility knife before I rip the trim off, just so I don't rip off too much paint. The utility knife gives you some separation. And then for getting the trim off, I'm just using a chisel and a small pry bar. And the trim comes off no problem. I'm not saving this trim. I'm going to redo all the trim in this house over the course of the next year, so I'm just going to toss that away. So you see I've shoved the chisel and the pry bar right through the floor. There's the pry bar coming through on this side, and on the left hand side you can't really see the chisel, but you can see that I have created quite a hole with the chisel. There's the chisel. So I'm going to go buy a door before I rip this one out so that I can make sure that they have one in stock, that kind of thing. I'm going to measure everything. This door is new enough that it should be, you know, a standard size, so it's 32 wide and 80 in height. And that is a fairly standard door size. If you weren't doing a standard size slab door, you could also measure the rough opening of the door, and that should also give you an idea of what kind of door slab you should get. So obviously the rough opening is going to be larger. So for me, the rough opening, 34 and 3/4 by 82 and 1/4. Which equates to a 32 by 80 door in modern times, and it's a right hand inward swing. So you can see I'm on the hinge side of the door. I'm using my right hand, so that is right hand opening, and like I said, the swing is into the house. So 32 by 80, right hand opening, inward swing. You can see the door off to the right now. It is the one that I wanted. The only issue with it is it's for a 2x4 wall, so I had to get the door jamb extender kit, which will extend the door jamb out to a 2x6 wall, which is obviously necessary. Otherwise it'll be too thin for the wall. So I'm just popping this door off, starting with the hinges. Get the hinges off and then remove the door completely. Obviously it's getting into winter time, so it is cold outside. Eventually I will put in some plastic. Then I'm going to take my Sawzall with a steel cutting bit, obviously with the ear defenders on, and just sort of cut all the screws out so that I'm not ripping things apart too much. But again, because I'm not saving the door jamb, it's not a very big deal if I end up cutting it, which I did just to make it easier, and it's going to fit in the car easier when I go to the dump. And just to make things a little bit easier, I remove all the screws on the hinges, because each hinge has at least one long screw going into the door jamb. And once the sides are off, the bottom comes off no problem. And you can see the spray foam I put in sticking through the floor there. I'll have to rip that out, but obviously that's just going to come out without any issue. Now what I'm doing is cutting the floor back to a point where the actual chipboard is still structurally sound. None of the existing chipboard near the door or under the door would hold somebody's weight, so it is dangerous. I'm going to cut it out. Obviously you want to be careful when you're cutting through the floor that you don't cut big notches out of your floor joists because that would weaken them. So I am being careful around the floor joists. You're probably going to nick them a little bit, but you know, just a little scratch isn't a big deal. You just don't want to cut a big chunk out of it. What I'm going to do is laminate additional 2x10 onto the existing sill plate from the inside and screw it into place. And through the power of video editing, you can see that I've already done that. So I just cut 3 2x10s at about 14 inches and screwed them into place, screwing from each side so that it's sandwiched in there pretty tight. And then other than that, I did put insulation down and some plastic so that I could actually insulate that area. And you can see that I've added a few more 2x10s, and that way everywhere that I put the floor, all edges will be supported by a 2x10 underneath it. And I am going to need to do a little bit of sanding just to make sure everything stays flat. So just used a palm sander to take down any of the ridges that I created when I put the additional 2x10s. And fortunately for me, everything's pretty level. I also am using some cut and seal wood preservative on every place that I sort of sanded down. I'm going to use a 3/4 inch piece of plywood, some flooring adhesive, and some flooring screws. And just like that, I've got a fresh piece of floor down. Likely when I redo the flooring, I'm going to have to sand the joint between the chipboard and the plywood just to make sure it's smooth, but that's not a big deal. My next step is to make sure all my heights are correct for the door. And I also put down sort of a kick plate with another piece of plywood, again using construction adhesive and a bit of silicone just to try and preserve everything. And then I've rip cut a 1/2 inch piece of plywood that's going to go under the door because the door is sitting a little bit low, and this 1/2 inch will bring it into the right height. And once I screwed down the 1/2 inch piece on the bottom, I did put down some Tyvek, and I added a 1/2 inch strip to the top as well, and that's the same width as the 2x6, and that's just to reduce the gap in the sort of the vertical plane for the door. Not much room to work in the laundry room, but I am going to do the door jamb extensions. Comes with screws, comes with the sides and top mount, and it does come with the actual metal extension as well for the bottom, which is just a channel and it sort of clips into place. When they ship them, they come for a 36 inch door, so you do have to trim 4 inches off of this if you have a 32, and obviously 2 inches if you have a 34 inch door. Now the sides have a cutout bevel, so it's pretty obvious how it fits on because the bottom fits around that metal plate at the bottom of the door. And then other than that, you just line it up and put screws through the pre-drilled holes. And that's the same for the top and the bottom. Again, it's for a 36 inch door, so if you have a 32 inch door, you are going to have to cut it down slightly. And there it is, screwed on. So you don't have to cut the sides, you just have to cut the top. I'm not using one of those fancy sill plates. I'm just using the caulking method as described in the Masonite door guide that comes with the door. And what they're telling you to do is put a bunch of caulking around the corners and then do 3 or 4 strips across the width of the door, sort of at 1 inch intervals or so, and just put down a healthy amount. Now I'm doing everything myself. I would recommend you have somebody help you. It's just so much easier to put the shims in on the hinge side if you have someone on the outside of the door and someone on the inside, because it's very difficult, particularly in the middle of the door, to pass shims through both sides. Very difficult to reach through there. And then really just got to line the door up. I got pretty lucky because my door frame was quite plumb and level. You can see I also added little pieces of plywood at the top of the door, and that's just to help prevent it from falling completely through and out of the house. So those are a big help. I would recommend you do that if you're by yourself particularly. So you see I got some shims in the bottom. Sort of they recommend doing the bottom and then the top first. I actually did the bottom and then I did the two top ones. I actually screwed the top ones in at that point in time. And then I did the hinge side, and then I did the sort of the door handle side. Overall, not too bad. It comes with 3 screws that go into the hinges as well. So make sure you go right through the hinges. Plus I added a few screws to the hinge side. Definitely easier with 2 people. Now for the spray foam, you do not want to use the regular spray foam. You want to get this specially formulated spray foam for doors and windows. Basically, this stuff doesn't expand quite as aggressively, so it won't cause your door frame to have deflection. And for the door handle, I put in a Wiser door handle, and it is the Halifax model of door handle. And you can see on the outside that I've already put the spray foam in there and that it's sticking out. And everything is pretty good. If anything, I would say it's not quite as centered as I would want it to be. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch towards the hinge side. So once the foam cures up for a day or two, just take a bread knife or something similar, and you can just cut the excess foam off so that you can slap down the trim. The additional thing I have to do on the outside is to get all of this old caulking off from where the brick mold used to be, and now I'm going to add some new brick mold to this side, and I'm not going to bother putting in a new doorbell. And I also need to do a little bit better job trimming up these pieces of shim. The brick mold I'm using is a little bit more expensive, but it's a PVC plastic product that looks like wood. However, it is rot resistant, animals don't eat it, that kind of thing. So it should last a lot longer than the previous brick mold that was on the house. Although that was 30-year-old brick molds. So for cutting it, I just cut the 2 tops on the brick mold at 45 degrees, and then I cut the length of it to 80 inches. But obviously that would depend on your door. And before I put the brick mold in, I am laying a bead of caulking along the edge. So no real secret to this. I just put the brick mold in place and used an air nailer and fired some nails through the brick mold and into the door frame. And then obviously I cut a piece for the top with 2 45-degree angles. So there it is. I still need to do some caulking and seal those cracks. I also need to fill all the screw holes that I put in when I was screwing through the shims. For this, I'm using a product called Plastic Wood by LePage. I definitely like this plastic wood product because it does dry very fast, and once it dries it's quite strong and it's very easy to sand. It goes very smooth and you can paint over it. So I give this plastic wood a pretty high marks if you're fixing holes in wood that you're going to paint. So you can see I've already sanded down the plastic wood, and I've done a initial coat of silicone on all the cracks. Trying to focus on the bottom edge with the silicone, and obviously it's window and door silicone. I put white down all around the trim, and then where it meets the house it's the almond color to match the siding. And I'm not going to paint it until next spring, but I did want to get the silicone down in case any snow or ice builds up in there. So I'm going to cut the video now. Eventually I'll get a deadbolt in there, but I'm not too concerned. And as far as the inside trim go, I'm going to have to wait until I redo the floor. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.